I'm speaking from a place that is real, not imagined. I'm speaking from a place that is not given by thinking. I'm speaking from a place that's natural, that's already fulfilled, that is the truth of what we are. And this truth that's natural, that is a real place to speak from, for most people, doesn't exist. And the reason it doesn't exist is because they're ignorant. And when I say ignorant, I don't mean it like something's wrong or you're bad or anything like that. I don't mean it that way. It's a condition that you're in called ignorance. And the condition that you're in called ignorance simply means that you're ignoring. That's what ignorance is. You're ignoring. And when you're ignoring reality, you have to pay a price. Right? And when you're ignoring the truth, you have to pay a price. So ignorance means you're ignoring something. You're ignoring the truth. You're ignoring the reality of what it is that you are. You're ignoring the reality of what life is. And you're living in a belief system. You're living in a thought process. You're living in an identity. You're living in a world in which you believed what Descartes said. The famous philosopher Descartes, he said, "I think, therefore I am." It's an interesting statement, and most people didn't question it. Most people thought it was a pretty profound insight on his part. I think, therefore I am. However, the reality of it is that the fact that thinking is occurring does not infer that you're doing the thinking. Now just look at this. The fact that thinking is occurring in and of itself does not naturally infer that you're doing the thinking. Descartes said, "I think," right? But the idea that I think is a belief. It's an inference. If you look at, right now, if you look at the thought process in your own mind that's occurring, you have a voice in your head, right? And you, like most other human beings, have considered that voice in your head to be you. It was never questioned, right? When thinking began, this is interesting, when thinking began, the awareness that is the reality of what we are lends its identity, right, to a thought process that generates the appearance of an existence. Let me say that again. The awareness that is the reality of what we are, right, which is unmanifest, has no form, right? Awareness has no form, lends itself to a thought activity. Thinking begins to happen in the baby's brain. Lends itself, goes from nothing to something. Thinking begins to happen in the baby's brain, and when thinking begins to happen in the baby's brain, the I thought occurs. The I thought. Thinking begins to happen in the baby's brain, and I am happens for the baby. I am happens. And then the baby gets language, and the baby starts to build a character, starts to build the reality, starts to build an identity, right? Gets a name, is told that this physical appearance is you, right? And then it goes on from there, right? And as that process progresses, right, it starts to become more complicated. And part of what happens is this I am gets added to, so it's not just I am, but it's I am, and then you have a name, right? And you have a body. So this identity starts to get built, right? The thing that's important to understand about the building of this identity is it's being built on nothing. What do I mean by that? Go back to the beginning. Awareness, which was unmanifest, lends itself, lends its life force, lends itself, right, to the thought process. It allows thinking to occur in the manifested physical body, and then from the nothing that it was, because awareness is empty, awareness is formless, from the nothing that it was, it shows up in form, lends itself to thinking, and then the human life begins, right? And when the human life begins and the thought process occurs, as this life matures, as this body grows, as this brain develops, right? It develops this identity in which it's separate from life, it's separate from other human beings, right? And it develops this identity in which survival becomes important, because if I am something that's physical and I'm separate from life and separate from other human beings, then the most important thing for me to do is to survive. Because if I don't survive, I'll disappear, I'll be gone, right? Right? So the brain starts to organize its programming for survival. How do I survive? I avoid threats. When fear happens, it's my nervous system reacting to something that could end my life, right? And so when fear happens, it stimulates behaviors that are built into the system, which is to run away or fight, right? So now the human life begins. Survival. Survival of what? The physical body. Because without the piece on the board, I can't play this game. I gotta have transportation in this life, so I need this body, survival of the physical body. That's not a problem, right? The problem is that beyond the identity of a physical body, we have an identity that gets put together and built, right? And that identity that gets put together and built is a psychological identity, right? We consider ourselves to be a person. We consider ourselves to be somebody, right, that has a self. The self that I am is the name I was giving. The self that I am is the psychological experience I'm having of being here, separate from the rest of the world, maybe even behind my eyes somewhere, right? And so I live my life this way. And one of the things that I experience in this condition that I am in is that I feel fear, I feel emotions, I feel anger, fear, frustration, confusion, right? And I don't feel satisfied. I don't feel at peace. I feel constantly on edge, constantly looking to see if anything's threatening me, right? And so this begins the life that I'm living. My nervous system is already intense, right? Because it has to be on constant alert, constant surveillance of the world to make sure nothing's coming to kill me, okay? Now the me that is protecting itself has extended itself beyond the physical body. The me that's protecting itself is now a psychological entity, not just a physical body, right? And the threats to that psychological entity are different from the threats to the physical body. The threats to who you are as a person are different from the threats to the physical body. The threats to who you are as a person occurs in terms of being rejected, right? Being unloved, being unworthy, isn't it? You know, feeling inadequate, feeling insecure, right? I have a self-image, right? And my self-image is in competition with all the other 8 billion self-images. And we're all in competition to try and make an appearance that looks good, right? We're all seeking happiness. We're all seeking peace. We're all seeking satisfaction. And we get up every day and use our energy to try and have this psychological self work, be satisfied, be happy, and be peaceful. That's a human life. That's what we're doing all the time with our energy, right? The thing about it that is being missed because of the ignorance, ignoring, right? The thing that's being missed because of the ignorance is that it's not working. It's not working. We continue to do it day after day, and the reason we continue to do it day after day is because it's the only game in town. We're a one-trick pony. This is what we learned to do. When you were a little kid, the world was going on before you showed up. Then you showed up, and the people that were there told you, this is what's happening here. And what do you know? You didn't have an alternative to it, right? So you just accepted, okay, this is what's happening here. This is what I am. I'm a body, you're a body, I'm a personality, you're a personality. We're living in space and time, and life is about the pursuit of happiness, peace, well-being, and satisfaction. And so that's what we do. We make money, we use our energy to try and be attractive enough to get somebody to love us. We use our energy to be attractive enough to feel secure enough that we're not ashamed of ourselves. to feel secure enough that we feel that we can compete in the social world and all the rest of it. And this is very stressful. It's a stressful situation to be in, surviving as a physical body, but not just that, surviving as the psychological self, right? And this goes on and on and on, and the stress wears us out, and we start looking for ways to alleviate the stress. So life becomes even more complicated, right? We start to experience anxiety, we start to experience depression, which is hopelessness. We start to experience hopelessness. We start to experience that this is a hopeless endeavor. No matter what I do, it doesn't ever last. No matter what I get, I lose it. No matter how hard I try, I still end up dissatisfied. No matter what I change, I still end up eventually in the same position where I'm unhappy and I don't feel peaceful. Life becomes about coping, struggling, trying to be in control, on and on and on. And so the thing we seek most after a while is to cease the suffering. The thing that we seek most after a while is to end the suffering. You know, that's why suicide rates are so high, because people want to end the suffering, right? That's why drug addiction and alcohol addiction is so high, because people want to end the suffering, right? It's also the reason why a lot of people are practicing meditation these days and studying the traditions from the East, because the traditions from the East say that these practices can allow us to discover the possibility of getting free from suffering. This is the promise of what meditation is as a practice. It goes far beyond stress reduction. It offers us the possibility of what they call in the East waking up. It offers us the possibility of discovering a way out of this condition we find ourselves in, so that we can actually enjoy the experience of being here and living a human life, which is a temporary situation. You know, what the people in the East traditions tell us, that a human life is a visit. It's a visit. And if you're going to be realistic about it, even if you live to be 100 years old, compared to all possible time, right, that's nothing. It's a blink of an eye, right? So it starts to become apparent, if you start to take on reality as it is, it starts to become apparent that you don't have time to waste. If there's a possibility for being happy, you need to get with it sooner rather than later. And what the Eastern teachings tell us is, in order for you to be able to benefit from these teachings, you have to calm this nervous system down. You have to calm this mental state down, because it's creating so much interference, right? Your thinking activity is creating so much distraction and interference, right? It's got you preoccupied all the time with your survival, preoccupied all the time with seeking happiness and seeking peace, right? You're trying all the time to get that, you know, and we use whatever we can to try and experience that, right? But it never works and it never lasts. So what do the teachings tell us? I can tell you what the teachings tell us, but I can also tell you that it will be meaningless and useless to you, because the you that will listen to what I'm saying is the problem. The you that will listen to what I'm saying, as Ramana Maharshi, a famous consciousness teacher, said, this is the way he described the situation. He said, there is a non-existent, a presupposed, right? You're presupposed, aren't you? Aren't you a presupposition? Haven't you supposed that you are a body? Haven't you supposed that you are a personality, right? There's a presupposition there. You had no choice about it, right? But there was a presupposition. So there's a presupposed, now watch, non-existent self that is seeking freedom, liberation, peace, and happiness for that non-existent self. That's the whole teaching. Because what that's telling you is that your suffering is a function of a mistaken identity. Your suffering is a function of thinking that the psychological self that you believe is real only exists in your thinking. If I ask you who you are, the only way you can answer the question is to tell me what you think, isn't it? What else are you going to do, right? You're going to tell me what you think. And if I ask you who you are and you tell me what you think, you'll tell me things like, well, I'm this body, I'm a personality, I'm the roles that I play in my life, and so forth. Now here's the thing. What the ancient teachings tell us is that you believe what you think, like I think, therefore I am. You believe what you think to be true, but thoughts are just thoughts. And one of the thoughts that is the essence and the foundation of your mistake and your suffering is that you are a self. That the psychological process that's occurring in your mind, right, is producing a self. I think, therefore I am. The psychological process that's occurring in your mind is producing a self, and you believe that's true. That's one of the reasons why in meditation, if you practice moving your attention away from thinking over to being aware of the body breathing, now the thought activity that was generating the self, generating the psychological idea of yourself, isn't happening. And so that's why when people practice meditation and they start to experience more time away from thinking, being aware of the body breathing, right, it starts to bring up some anxiety or restlessness, right? Like, what's going on here, right? And so for most people, that's enough, right? Oh, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm not good at it. I don't want to do that anymore. I feel too restless. I don't want to do that anymore. My mind won't stop running, right? Well, that is the biggest barrier to establishing a meditation practice, right? Is to start to feel unsettled or restless and have that be enough for you to stop, right? Why? Because you feel threatened. And who is it that feels threatened? The psychological self that exists in thinking. Are you following this at all? The psychological self that exists in thinking. Here's the deal. This is the essence of the teaching. That psychological self that exists in thinking does not actually exist. Now the body does, so the survival of the body, that's understandable, right? You need that to be here, right? But do you need a phantom self to be here? Do you need a psychological entity that exists nowhere else other than in your thought process? And the fact that that exists in your thought process and you believe that means it's real and it's true puts you in the world of that thought process as a psychological identity that's trying to be happy, trying to survive, trying to get peace of mind. Right? So what the teachings say, the way the Buddhist teachings describe the typical human being, they say it's a hungry ghost. It's a hungry ghost. In other words, it's not real, it doesn't exist, and it's never satisfied. It's a hungry ghost. And that's the life you get to lead. But the teachings tell us there is the possibility of freedom, there is the possibility of escaping from the suffering. But that possibility involves that you have to deal with and face the truth, and the truth is that who you've been being, who you believe you are, the money that you put your bank in doesn't exist. Who you've been being and who you think you are doesn't actually exist. It's only a thought process that's occurring. And if you succeed in relaxing the nervous system and relaxing the physical body and calming the mind and paying attention to the awareness of the body breathing, you may discover that this awareness of the body breathing does exist. The thought activity that's producing the illusion that you're a personality doesn't exist. Right? Part of that illusion is that we believe we occupy the body, right? But one of the things the ancient teachings say is, okay, if you believe you occupy the body, do an inquiry. Take a look. Take a look. Tell me where in your body you are. You've been living your life as if this is the truth, right? So if you want to find out if it really is the truth, take a look in your body and tell me where you are in your body. Science has done research where they have done research with the brain activity, right? To see if there's a place in the brain that this idea of a self is being generated, right? Because it doesn't really exist. So it's got to be getting generated somewhere, right? And they would stimulate different areas of the brain, right? They would stimulate the visual area of the brain. You know, they could identify areas of the brain that have to do with vision, with hearing, you know, and so forth. But one of the things that they did in this research is one of the stimuli that they presented to the brain is they said, you know, who are you? You know, who are you? To see where that stimulated the brain using, you know, EKG, right? No response. No response. So there is no area of the brain that responds to the idea of identity. There is no identity there. And if you look and see, okay, where am I in the body? Where do I exist in the body, right? We operate with this idea, well, maybe I'm somewhere here behind the eyes looking out, right? Well, that's nothing but a thought, right? Can you really tell me that there's something behind these eyeballs looking out? You know, if we did some surgery and did some anatomy, you know, looking to see in here, all we would find is bones and blood and nerves. We wouldn't find any self. Right? So when you first hear this, it sounds very strange, you know, very unusual. What do you mean I don't have a self? What do you mean I don't exist? I'm here. You know, that's the thing. You say, I don't accept that I'm not a self. I'm here. How can I not have a self? It's true that you're here, but you're not here as a psychological self. You're here as the awareness that is your natural state. Now, here's the thing that's very important to understand. That what your personality will do, that non-existent self that seeks freedom, satisfaction for itself, what it will do, because it's trying to maintain its existence, because it believes it's real, right? So when it hears, oh, you're not what you think you are, but the awareness is real, that does exist, so then the non-existent self says, oh, okay, I'll relocate there. Okay, now I do exist, don't I? Because I'm the awareness, and that's real, and that's actually happening, so now I do exist, don't I, right? And the answer to that is no. Why? Well, examine the awareness. Does that awareness have a form? Does that awareness have a form? Does that awareness exist in time, like you think you do? Does that awareness need anything or want anything like you think you do? Right? No, it doesn't. It's empty. It's formless. And we're saying that's what you really are. Empty and formless is what you really are. That does actually exist. And if you are able to successfully transition away from this mistaken identity to the reality of what does exist, and if you understand that's not a self, the reality of what you are is not a self. Awareness is not a self. It is the source of existence itself. It's not a self. That's the thing that you have to grok here. That's the thing that you have to realize. And the realization of it is not an intellectual process. You can't get there through a thinking activity. That's an intellectual process. The only way you can get there is to realize yourself as that awareness. And when you realize yourself as that awareness through the practice of meditation, you start to experience the truth, which is the awareness is free, happy, satisfied, and peaceful all the time. So what you've been seeking has always been available to you, but you've been ignoring it and believing in something that you've been hypnotized to consider to be true that's simply not true. Right? So then you might say, oh, okay, so then if what I am is really the awareness and it has no form and it has no shape and it's already satisfied, happy, and fulfilled, how do I be that in the world? Because it has no form. How do I be that in the world? Right? And the answer to that is you be that in the world. I'm giving you the whole teaching here. You be that in the world by coming back and realizing that the personality that you thought you were is awareness. It is awareness, right? But when you understand that it is awareness, right, you stop thinking of it as being separate and different from awareness, and you start realizing it is the same as awareness. But it's not a self. Awareness is not a self. And therefore, awareness, if you take on your true nature, which is not a self, and start to experience being in the world that way, that's what that saying means when they say you're in the world but not of the world. You're free from the suffering that occurs in the world because you are now experiencing the reality of what you are, which is not a self, and it wasn't born, and it doesn't die. It's the unborn reality that is the reality of your true nature. That's the teaching in a nutshell, right? Having heard that, even if you understand it, which you're probably still working with, right? But having heard that, even if the understanding you get from it is that there's a possibility here for you to be free, happy, satisfied, and peaceful. If you just get that much, there's a possibility here. Maybe you don't really understand it completely yet, right? But over time, if you keep studying it and if you keep practicing meditation, it'll all come together. Interesting, right? It'll all come together. Look at how it comes together. This is called prayer, right? It'll all come together. And when it comes together, you will experience waking up to the truth. You'll experience a natural state of happiness, well-being, peace, and satisfaction. It's available all the time, but you've got to practice coming out of the hypnotism that you've been living your life in and start to experience things as they really are. And then life becomes satisfying. Life becomes an enjoyable experience, right? And when it comes time for the body to die, not a problem. It's not a problem because I know that it was useful for me as transportation, but given that I'm not physical, right? Given that the reality of what I am is not physical and the reality of what I am is already completely fulfilled, that when it comes time for the body to die, I can just relax. I can just relax and let go, and it's not a problem. So, any questions?